Hello, hello. This is Julia Wahl in her podcast How to Live. And today I have the pleasure of being in conversation with Isabelle Leboeuf. Isabelle, who's a clinical psychologist based in Lille, France, and she's an expert in social joy and compassion. And in her private practice, she integrates hypnotherapy, CBT, and of course, compassion-focused therapy. Welcome, Isabelle. It's a real pleasure. And should we know anything else about you?
Well, thank you, Julia, for having me. I've listened to your podcast, and you have already had amazing people in this podcast. So I'm really grateful to be with you today and to enjoy this moment. What's new? I have my new book coming out in France, so it will be in French, but it's called Healing Relational Wounds. So I'm a little bit excited for the coming out of the book.
So we will we'll discuss the books, because I'm really interested in your book. And the book is about compassion and how compassion can support relationship, how love and compassion are different, but connection is really linked to the first psychology of compassion, being sensitive. But we'll discuss all of this a bit later. But first of all, I'd like to start with. Before we dig more into healing and difficulties when it comes to love and loving, I'd like to address the topic of joy. So, why is joy important, and how is it linked to compassion, Isabelle?
Well, I guess there are many things in positive emotions and in joy, but when it comes to compassion, the first thing that it's important to keep in mind is that joy is really rewarding. So often when I talk to people about compassion, mainly in France, they often react by telling me that, it's moving toward negative emotions, and that's tricky. And I don't want to focus on negative emotions. And I often I remind them that when you relieve suffering, there's joy coming out. And this joy is really rewarding. It's helping us to find meanings in life. And it's really something that gives positive experience of compassion. Compassion is not something dull, something dark, something only difficult. It is difficult, but it's also joyful. It's also meaningful, and it brings a lot into people's life. So I think joy is really something that helps us go through compassion. And to keep in mind this joy is really important. Researchers have shown that it's basically the difference between empathy and compassion. When you experience empathy for someone who is sad, you tend to experience this sadness. But when you experience compassion, you also stay connected with the fact that this emotion will not last forever, and that this person can experience healing, and you can really connect to the joy that will come after this sadness.
What you're saying reminds me of this concept called pleasure activism. So this concept was first introduced by Keith Siller in the 80s, if I'm correct. And it was about supporting activists, because activists, it doesn't matter whether it's to do with people or animals being in suffering, or just being involved in other helping activities, all sorts of activism, but it's to do with being constantly faced on a daily basis with various types of suffering. And what Keith Siller was saying, and many activists today are saying as well, is that we need these moments of pleasure, and it's not a way of being hedonistic. It's actually thanks to these experiencing pleasant experiences of experiencing pleasure, whether it's in through food or sex or art. We then can have more energy in order for us to then be faced with suffering yet again. So it's about the balance, not being overwhelmed.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. If we think of ecology, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same. Often people experience anxiety, and they may be overwhelmed by the fear of climatic changes. But if you really connect with the joy in everyday life of, for example, taking a bike instead of taking the car, it's really something that is positive in the life and brings health to myself, not only to others. We often think of altruism as something we do for others, but when you think in terms of joy, really being altruistic is something that brings me joy too. It's in both directions, exactly like compassion. When we experience compassion for others, we can also experience a reward and be happy and have a life that is more meaningful. So it's, yeah.
So actually, joy might be something helping us deal or cope with the next topic that I like to discuss with you, and it's to do with your upcoming book. Relational wounds. So if you could tell us a little bit more about this book of yours, that'd be great.
Well, one thing I talk about in my book about joy, and that is, I think, important to keep in mind, is that joy is like the branches of the tree. It has a function of growth, where negative emotions are the emotions of protection. And I think CFT brings a lot of highlights on the functions of emotions, and more specifically differentiating the two types of positive emotions, the ones that are linked to soothing, and the ones that are more activated, that are the emotions that we experience when we do things. And so I think we have this vision of positive emotions are as being good, and negative emotions are as being bad or negative to ourselves and to others, where they are not that. They all have a function, and it can be mixed. You can have rewarding emotions going through difficult emotions, and you can experience difficulties with positive emotions. And I think in therapy, it's really important to go beyond the idea that positive emotions are only good. They can be very tricky. It's for example, I work with many women on their experiencing sexual desire. There are a lot of learned inhibitions around feeling aroused, around feeling pleasure or joy around sexuality. And also sometimes for men, but it's really important to have that in mind. Or for people, when people are proud, they can be ashamed of being proud, because hey, who do you think you are? And all these positive emotions can be also tricky.
Mm, mm,
So it's really important to open up therapeutic work on
mm,
exposure toward
mm,
positive emotions,
mm,
and
mm,
especially in relationships.
mm. So your book is about relationships. So
Yeah.
what can you tell us about the compassion and how it can be helpful when it comes to relationships? It seems like an easy question, but I think it might be a little bit more challenging than that.
Well, I think the extent to what we were saying is that we often think of love as something good.
Mm,
Often we think, oh,
mm,
it's appreciating things.
mm,
It's only experiencing positive
mm,
emotions and only experiencing good thing. And when it's not, it means that there's a problem in the
mm,
relationship.
mm,
And actually, any relationship is linked to difficult emotions, positive or
mm,
negative. There's a lot of different
mm,
emotions, and there's a lot of suffering linked to
mm,
relationships. So really being able to connect to a compassionate motivation
mm,
is something that allows us to move toward
mm,
relationships and to be open to experience different kind
mm,
of emotions. And the positive thing about this opening is that it brings more connection.
mm,
And so being rooted in compassionate
mm,
motivation when it comes to relationships is really something that
mm,
will increase the connection
mm,
to others, but also to ourselves.
mm,
And am I able to listen to the other person when they
mm,
are talking about difficult things?
mhm, mhm,
And am I able to stay open to my own suffering when it comes to love and to sadness and my own
mm,
anxiety toward relationships?
mm.
It's really tricky.
I think what you're saying about motivation is very important. So constantly going back to that initial intention, and seeing where we are on that path together and separately as a couple. But also, I think compassion is about. Being realistic, because love isn't about necessarily being in love, so to speak, with everything that our partner does, or the other
Yeah,
way around. It's about accepting. Actually, at times we might dislike certain things, and we might be at times right about it, and even being critical in a good way. And by critical, I mean critically thinking and showing our partner, and our partner showing us what maybe isn't right, the things that we're doing, or the ways in which we're thinking. So it's not about saying, oh, I just love every single bit of you. It's actually having someone who, in a safe way, can help us grow by also showing us our, I don't know, foibles, our mistakes,
exactly.
etc.
Mm. Yeah, that's exactly what matters. And often with my clients, I draw a heart on paper,
Mm,
and inside that heart, I write a plus and a minus.
mm,
And often people only want the plus. They only
mm,
want the good dinner, the
mm,
sharing
mm,
projects and good moments and good
mm,
sexuality,
mm.
etc.
Yeah.
But they don't want the negative. They don't want the difficult
Mm,
parts. And in doing that, they break the heart in two,
mm,
and they only want half of it.
mm,
And I think what compassion brings is the ability to stay present to the
mm,
suffering inside the relationship,
mm,
and being able to say, oh, I feel shame when you take your hand away from me,
mm,
and really bring awareness to that can change
mm,
everything in the relationship. Because if
mm,
you don't, maybe you will run away, you will
mm,
avoid talking about it, even being aware of it. Maybe you'll have a drink of
mm,
wine to
mm,
stop experiencing that pain. and you can be taken in loops of avoidance and of neglecting some part of yourself. When you are able to bring awareness to it and even share it with your partner, it can really deepen the relationship. So but to do that, you need to have compassion.
The way that you are describing some of the people that come to you, it's like as if they were hoping for a love affair rather than a relationship.
Exactly.
But I don't necessarily blame them, because we are constantly bombarded with the narrative, whether it's in movies or books. It's supposed to be or nice and just pleasant, you know. If there's a story, it usually ends when people get together, but you don't necessarily see what's next. Whilst I don't condemn having love affairs, and maybe even going to that love affair period in our relationship. Sometimes the pain whilst being in a love affair actually is all down to us wanting something more, wanting a stable relationship. But once we're in that relationship, then it's not that rosy anymore. So
yeah.
And we want to be seen, but then there's the question: do we want to be completely seen, including these foibles, including these mistakes that we all make at times? And so what was the main intention behind your book, Isabelle, if I may ask you a little bit more about that?
Well, if I can just go back to what you were saying, actually, the love affair is, I think, once I counted how many clients I had that came for having a love affair, it's 10% of the people I see, because, yes, you are exactly right. It can be very rewarding, but at the same time, it can be devastating, because if it's a relationship you are having to avoid the problems in your first couple, well, you may be relieved at first, but you will also be stuck in a situation where you're not able to be fully yourself in your everyday life. So it can be very, very difficult and source of a lot of suffering. Not for everyone, but for some person. What was why did I do this book? I guess for two reasons. The first one is that I did a PhD on that topic, and I was so frustrated with all the things I was not able to say in the PhD. So I needed to put it somewhere, and it was also for my clients, because I really felt that I could explain things and with more extent and offer the work I'm doing every day in my office to maybe some people that are away from me. But I think it's a continuity from my everyday work. I think relationships is in most of people's suffering, maybe not all, but a lot of clients I have some difficulty in their relationships to themselves or to others.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part, that the relationships are both the source of our greatest joys and our and suffering at the same time. And whilst we are being taught mathematics and languages at schools and all these other things, which was absolutely fine. But there's no such thing as a relationship or relational topics. How do we go about it? or caring for one another, understanding, accepting, even if I may not like you or not like you at all times, and on the other hand, there's this romanticized narrative, which is infantile, and I think, and I'm not the only one saying this. We live in the times of being infantile, our inner children. I would love for us to drop that idea. How about being an adult and being able to experience joy, because with all due respect, children don't have the same wisdom as at least some adults have. So I can be both wise with my adult experience and being able to experience joy. And being able to recognize that we all have different sides to us. And so me and my partner, and it's not about our partner never criticizing us. I wouldn't like for my partner, my partner does criticize me in a good way. So again, it's to do with critical thinking, not being shaming,
Exactly.
like not shaming me. Because thanks to that, I can grow, and but of course, at times I would prefer for her to tell me, maybe more compliments, complimenting me more, but they wouldn't be true, and they wouldn't necessarily be helpful.
That's really interesting what you're saying, because I think indeed the part of us that is the inner child is often bringing a lot of joy in our life. And we are often taught that becoming an adult is being cut from that part of us and being only wise and only serious, and we can even be shamed for being joyful and enthusiastic but I think becoming an adult is really switching from others taking care of our inner child and being able to take care by ourselves also of this inner child, and being connected. It's the relationship we can have and with the between our wise part and that joyful inner child, which also brings some kind of wisdom. Actually, I think 4 years old are really good teachers for many things. To be able to experience awe in life is really really important in regulating our emotions and finding meaning in life. Often when I find myself depressed or very sad, I try to sit down and find a connection to something that brings out to me, like the universe, for example. And from that, the inner wonder, I can start soothing myself and bring perspective to what I'm experiencing. So I think it's a good metaphor, the relationship with the inner child. It's not only about healing the wounds; it's also bringing the joy of our inner child.
But whilst being an adult and therefore being able to abandon that inner child in a way, because now I can embrace being joyful whilst being an adult, and I don't have to be ashamed for that. Because you're right that at times it's to do with this with the society or other people telling us that it's not right to be joyful because you're an adult. You have to be so serious now. But as we know, sometimes being serious has nothing to do with being wise, and it's at times it's quite the opposite. So another question, I'll be a little bit naughty here because it's a question that journalists like to ask me quite often. So I'll ask you the same question, Isabelle.
Crossing fingers, I can answer.
So do you think that compassion is a criteria when we are in love, when we're or when we are in a relationship? Do you think compassion is needed in relationships?
Well, I think one thing that is important is what Paul Gilbert always says, is that it's important to differentiate love and compassion and not to confuse them. And there are really two different motivations, and it's bringing a lot of clarity when you differentiate them. So you don't, many people, when they experience love, they tend to be more sensitive to the suffering of the people they love. So even Darwin had noticed that when people are with closer relationships, they can experience more easily some compassion. But experiencing the suffering of the people we love doesn't automatically lead to suffering. It can also lead to what I call the motivation for non-suffering. That means we don't want the people we love to experience suffering. For example, parents, they may protect their child from all suffering and create sort of a bubble around them and protect them from the suffering of the world, which makes sense because they are so sensitive to that suffering. It's so difficult to allow this suffering in themselves. They don't want any suffering. And the problem with that is that it cuts compassion and it doesn't allow the child to experience things, but it can also lead to some extent to some aggressivity or avoidance and bring to some difficult situations. So often I work with my clients and I tell them that as a parent, maybe the most difficult part of being a parent is to allow difficult emotion in the relationship, to allow the sadness of the separation, to allow their children to suffer from disease, to suffer from separation themselves, etc. So I think it's not, love doesn't automatically lead to compassion. It leads to sensitivity to suffering, and also for patients in therapy. As a therapist, we can also go from compassion to being triggered by some kind of avoidance. A patient who doesn't want to experience suffering can take us with them, and it can block the therapy. So we really need to differentiate the two. Having an empathic and a loving relationship doesn't automatically lead to compassion. But of course, compassion helps the relationship.
So it would be yes. It would compassion would be helpful. Be helpful having compassion when we were loving another human being, because it helps us at times deal with the pain of loving, I guess, as well.
Exactly.
Not to mention the fact that it might help the person whom we love to not only know how to suit themselves, but also how to be brave in the world, because there's another thing that we often forget, that or maybe is often not mentioned enough, or other things are actually mentioned, that that compassion is only about soothing, and again, while soothing is very important, it's about us being able to soothe or each other or self-soothe. So therefore, or thereafter we can be compassionate, act in a compassionate way, and so have the courage to face the difficulties, to go out into the wider world, and do these compassionate deeds.
Yeah. I think the first thing we can do when we are in a relationship with someone who is anxious, the first move is to soothe this person. But when you think about a secure relationship, it's not a soothing relationship. It's a place where you can experience some kind of soothing, but also that allows you to explore and to move away from. So when I work with a client, for example, who asks me to soothe them, to reassure them, sometimes I start with doing it a little bit, and then I explain them that now I'm going to be there for them to explore their anxiety, and they need to move toward that anxiety, and I'll be there on the side of the road, but I'm not going to soothe them. I'm going to encourage them to explore the fear. Which is very different.
So, if you don't mind, a slightly personal question. So, why compassion? Why CFT? How did it all start in your life, Isabelle?
Well, that's a tricky question. Where did it start? I would tend to push the button very far and to say that it probably started before I was even born. Of course, our ancestors, and I think that's part of CFT too, to clarify that the motivation for compassion is something that comes in our biology. I guess it comes from my family too. There are many healers in my family. But I guess if I just stop on my birth, something I never talked about is a little story around my birth. Is those things people whisper when you're a child, and you hear the whispers, and you know that it matters. And once I heard this story that was whispered around my birth, and it was my mother saying that, "Oh, I'm so glad she didn't came on the 12th. She was not born on the 12th of November, because that was the anniversary of the death of her grandfather." And she was so sad, and she was afraid that I would come that day, and I came on the 15th. So I guess there was already sadness and compassion around my birth. And I think the first time I read something on compassion was when I was a teenager. The first book I read, it's called In the Lap of the Buddha. And the way I experienced CFT was I met Paul Gilbert in a workshop in Paris in 2013. And I had the feeling when I heard Paul Gilbert explain what was CFT, that it really made sense to the way I practiced CBT at that time. And there was something I was doing, I was experiencing in my therapy that was not spoken in CBT. And I had really the feeling that CFT was adding something. I was adding understanding around motivation, around things that were there in CBT, but were not really clarified. So that's how I started my path with CFT, and I went to England to learn more about CFT.
And is it now, these might be two separate questions actually, helping you in your personal work, and how is it facilitating what you do in your office as a psychotherapist? Because you said that you were practicing CBT, but there was, it's my understanding of what you said, that there was something missing maybe.
I think there are different ways it helps me in my practice. It's on on the therapist side first, it helps me to understand the motivations that are playing in therapy, my own motivation, but also what's going on in the relationship. But I think on the other side, on the client side, it's really helping to have an awareness of what the client is going through from the very first session. I think it's the first session is really critical. It's a place where there's a lot of issues around compassion. What is the person's motivation to search for help? And how does this person experience the fact of allowing themselves to be helped? And often we are so focused on the therapy and on the being a good therapist and doing things well that we may forget what the patient is going through, the fear of going in therapy, and maybe they are feeling floated because they're here. And the CFT is really helping to keep in mind that okay, there is something around compassion here, and we can talk about it, and put words with the clients. Oh, okay, you are doing this compassionate move in coming to therapy. How is it for you? What does it mean? Is it difficult? Do you have fear? Do you have blocks? Do you have resistances? And allowing to put words on this is really critical.
And so has it changed your practice much?
I think compassion was there all the way in my practice. I think the way I worked personally with CFT was to work on receiving compassion, because I think I started as a therapist, wanting to be a good therapist, wanting to have a compassionate identity. I'm a healer. And I found that the more I work, the more I move forward with compassion, and I realized that maybe it's not that much about being a good healer and good therapist. It may also be about being able to be a human being who is also able to receive compassion, to be vulnerable, and not so much doing things, but allowing the clients to experience compassion.
And any thoughts on how do you see the future of not only your therapeutic practice, but the future of therapy in general? How would you like to see it in the future? How would you like to see it evolve and change and maybe be improved, Isabelle?
Well, what I see, what I experience is that it's more and more process-based. Therapy is that there are more and more bridges that are built between different approaches. And I myself have been trained in many different therapeutic approaches, and I see more and more paths, and people wanted to move away from being only CBT or being only ACT, and I think CFT is really helping as it is integrative to walk that path of integration.
So going back to your book, if we may. What are your hopes when it comes to this book? What would you like for this book to maybe change or inspire?
I think the first thing I had in mind when I wrote this book is that you have more compassion when you have compassion for one person. And the minute you start to extend your compassion to many people, the more you think of people, the harder it is to have a compassionate motivation. So I really stayed focused on one person, and an imaginary person that would receive the book, and who would go through the different experiences I propose. And what I hope is that one person will benefit from it and will enjoy the rides, because I wrote it like a therapeutic experience. So that's what I hope.
So I'm aware of the time, and we just to reveal a bit. We had a bit of testing recording issues. So my very last question is how to live according to Isabelle Leboeuf. Just an easy question, Isabelle.
Well, I think we can go back to what we were saying, is that I think the way I try to live is to stay connected with the joy of a 4 years old, and have a connection with the compassionate wisdom, and help this joy to flourish in my life. That's what I'm trying to do.
So just to emphasize the fact that joy is just as important, and all these pleasant experiences and emotions, in order to maintain our compassion and motivation. So yes. It's not only about being faced with suffering and pain and constantly being in all kinds of battles, but it's also about just enjoying yourself at times, because this can be just as helpful when it finally comes to us having to cope with these difficulties.
Yes, and one thing I would like to add is that we are in a capitalist society that focus a lot on joy as something you do, as something you make, as something you have. But really, joy is something about being, about awareness, about allowing. And I hear so many people tell me, oh, I don't understand. I have everything and I'm not happy. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's not about having happy. It's about being happy. And I think it's a really important switch we need to make, and CFT is helping us with that.
Yeah, I think what we're referring to now is the term coined by Eva Illouz, commodities, so emotions as commodities, as products, and even when we go to a workshop, we want to experience something, maybe cathartic, maybe because we paid for it, and we want to, for our lives forever to be changed after this one workshop, or maybe even a series of workshops, but that just simply doesn't work that way. So even emotions and relationships become commodities, products, and
exactly.
And maybe we should also stress, and again going back to your book, that compassion is about us being reminded of all these various connections that create us, because it's not only about being connected to different parts of who we are individually, but being connected to others, and
yes.
and seeing how different we are because of others. Actually, that there is no me without others, and it's quite a recent Western development, this concept of the individual self.
Exactly. And the interdependence and of our happiness and consciousness is not only inside our body
Mm-hmm.
and our brain is
Mm-hmm.
something that is in synchronization with our culture, with the people
Mm-hmm.
around us, with the world, and it's really important to open that vision.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Julia, for doing it.
Thank you, Isabelle. Wishing you a good life, and also do have a good life. Whoever is listening to us, and all the best, Isabelle. Thank you
You
so
too, Julia.
much.
Thank you.